BlockRadar has already processed about 40 million plus US dollars. Don't know if that figure is correct at this moment.
It's not correct anymore. We are at 92 million.
Oh my God, that's a very impressive number, and a big up to you guys. Huge congratulations, by the way, for winning the Crypto Valley Conference Startup Pitch.
So we just won last week, and I was just telling Phyllis at the beginning of this call, like I am still not even settled in. So I'm just moving all over the world at the moment. And I remember telling my team before going, I was like, guys, we have to win. So what can we do to make sure our pitch is ready to go?
Hi, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Fintech Forum. I am your host, Phyllis, and today we're joined by someone who's worked across some of the most exciting spaces in crypto, payments, and tech. She has scaled go-to-market strategy at Coinbase and led growth at global platforms like Uber, Braintree, and Discover. Now she is the co-founder and COO of BlockRadar, a company on a mission to redesign how money moves across borders and using stablecoin infrastructure. Morgan, it's so nice to have you here today.
Thank you so much, Phyllis. Thank you so much for having me.
Amazing. So before we get into all the exciting work you're doing at BlockRadar, I'm curious, what first pulled you into the world of financial infrastructure and operations? Was it something you naturally gravitated towards, or did it just click for you at some point?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. So I've worked in the financial services / payment space since I graduated. And so that's been a long time. And so I studied at the University of Michigan. I was in the business school there for undergrad. And so I gravitated towards operations and strategy when I was a student. And so then it just made sense to apply that when I went into the workforce. And so I started my career, wanting to learn and wanting to kind of just jump right in. And so the opportunity I got was at Discover Card or Discover Financial Services, which is essentially a credit card company and also a credit card network. And I was in an operational leadership program. And so that was really, really wonderful because I was able to rotate through different parts of the business. I was able to actually learn different facets of the organization. So I started out in, Discover Bank, deposit operations. Then I was on our marketing team for Discover Card. And then I moved over to the Discover Network side where, I was working on BD and partnerships. And so that was really it was the last, rotation that really kicked off my desire to want to stay in the financial services and payment space, because at that time our partner was PayPal. And it's funny because, ultimately I ended up going to PayPal later in my career. But at that time, it was just a really great segue to see how, PayPal was just this like large force across the payment space in terms of innovation. And so I desperately kind of wanted to get further and further into, this payments infrastructure, specifically on the tech side. And so it kind of just started like that. And my career just kind of got more and more exotic on the payment side of the house, if you will. But yeah.
That's really interesting. I think I missed the bit about you working at PayPal. Wait,
Yes.
I didn't know that. How?
Yes.
What role did you hold at PayPal, and what were you doing?
So Braintree, which is a competitor to Stripe, is owned by PayPal. And so I worked directly for Braintree, but I mean, it's, when you get acquired like that, it's all of the same thing. And so it was really cool because Braintree was like this progressive, very like small. I think there was like 150 people on the team at that time. We were lean, nimble. But then we kind of had this nice blanket of PayPal. So you kind of got a lot of exposure, but also you kind of learned a little bit more around how, as a company, we were thinking about global payments. And I think, Braintree was very I mean, well, it was global, but it was still quite domestic at the time. And so when I was at Braintree, I led a team of financial operation analysts, and so our goal was to do more or less merchant pricing. So, when I first started the team, we only did domestic pricing, and then I told my boss I was getting bored, and I had more capacity, and so then I was given EMEA, and then I was, given APAC, as these, markets to lead pricing on. Then eventually I got promoted, and then I led those teams of analysts looking at pricing all over the world. So it's kind of my time at PayPal. But then also too, PayPal was, redesigning the way that we did billing as well. So we worked a lot with the PayPal stakeholders as well, and my team kind of did that.
Oh, that's really interesting. And so I believe working at all these different sectors taught you something about money and infrastructure, because you've mentioned Discover and it focuses on traditional finance, Uber focuses on logistics, and then Coinbase crypto, which is ideally, I think that's the perfect career trajectory for me, if I may say. And so each of these industries think differently about money and infrastructure. How did these transitions happen for you? And how did they shape your perspective on how money should move?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I guess the one company I worked at that was technically not a payments company, but it was, more in the mobility space, was Uber. But even my time at Uber, is still very much fundamentally looking at payment processing, because it's funny because at the time, Braintree was processing the payments for Uber. Right. So I already knew kind of the payments and the pricing structure, right, going into Uber. But because I was in Latin America, my remit wasn't on the payment side. But then when Uber launched Uber Cash, which is kind of the closed looped ability to kind of, top up your wallet within the Uber ecosystem, I had to launch that. They're like, that would be you. That's your expertise. You'll launch this year for us in Colombia. And so I think when, I think about financial innovation and financial infrastructure, I started out at Discover, as I said. And, if you think about it, at a point in time, credit card payments, and in some places in the world, it's still quite innovative, right? It allows people to be able to have access, right, to purchase things, in e-commerce platforms. It allows people to be able to create another level of financial freedom by having access to this credit. And so then you look at this next level, and then you look at, now who is really mastering, this is 10 years ago, who's really mastering cross-border payments, who's really supporting merchants globally. Oh, that's PayPal, right? And when you look at the financial infrastructure that they had built, they were for sure by far one of the biggest leaders really, navigating this space. And then, as I then went to coins.ph, and so coins.ph is a e-wallet and crypto exchange in the Philippines. And coins.ph was a really interesting experience because it kind of had everything in one, right? And so it was an e-wallet, and you think about M-Pesa or even a Venmo for the Americans listening. So it had the last mile payments where people could pick up cash if they wanted to from retailers in the Philippines, but also people could leverage money on their e-wallet. But then they had crypto, right? And so this for me was a really amazing experience, because as an American, I got into crypto as an investor in 2017, very casino style, very kind of let's see how to get rich, sort of yeah, use case. And I just remember all my friends were telling me about it. So I was like, okay, so I got in 2017, but now fast forward to 2020, you're now in the middle of the pandemic. People across the world who depend on going outside and working as street vendors and selling things, like livelihood depend on having an open country. And so now you think about a pandemic where people are, fundamentally not allowed to leave their homes. And so what are the ways that these people can earn money? And what are the ways that people can actually have a livelihood? Or what are the ways that people can receive money, right? And so then now looking at this Filipino use case, it became very apparent how important crypto and stablecoin was to actually powering real world use cases and changing, financial outcomes. There's a lot of controversy now about like the whole play to earn that was popular in the Philippines then, but so many people had the ability to earn money, right, where they couldn't, because they were stuck in their homes. And so it just really made me want to double down on that. And one of my personal North Stars is really wanting to have that financial freedom, wanting to have that democratization of financial services. And so I felt like it was at that kind of like pivotal moment where I'm like, okay, crypto is the only way that this can happen. I've looked at PayPal, and as much as I love my previous employer, when I moved to Colombia, when I was living in Latin America for Uber, PayPal was extremely expensive to send money across borders. I was like, oh my God, as an American, I was privileged to not have to pay to send money, domestically. But the moment now I'm sending money out of the country, the receiver, so the person who needs it the most in, these emerging markets, are paying a tax. And so I was like, oh, no. So, I thought Southeast Asia was like the pinnacle of, financial innovation, where you have similar, similar disparities across unbanked and underbanked. And so, working in a country where there's regulatory clarity and there's regulatory innovation can be really, really helpful. And so that was why, I doubled down on crypto and then kind of started my journey in Southeast Asia. And then obviously, I went to Coinbase thereafter.
Awesome. And from what you've been speaking of, like you've had experience working across different continents, I think about 4. Count Asia Pacific, North America, Africa, and all of these have different infrastructure and regulations and even user behavior, which you've touched on. How do you approach? Ideally, how did you approach go-to-market strategy, and even currently, how are you approaching go-to-market strategy in such diverse environments?
Yeah, so I think like, it's a good question. And, my previous, and Coinbase, I focused on 2 customer segments at my time there. When I was launching Base on the continent of Africa, I was really focused on developers. And then, for the rest of my job at Coinbase, I was driving growth and expansion in APAC. And so, I'm really focused on consumers, right? So now at BlockRadar, I'm actually focused on businesses. So I went from B to D, B to C to B2B, right? And, kind of goes back to my Braintree days when I was deeply B2B. But, go-to-market is very different. Consumer needs are very, very different, right? From Latin America to Africa to Southeast Asia. And I think, people in the West or people in the, developed markets probably think, oh, you can serve all of these markets with the same thing. You just start in America or you start in the West, and then you just try to make it work in these other markets. And it's just not true, because like I remember when I was in Lagos, first time I went to Lagos, I went to go use my, credit card somewhere, and it was declined. Now I've been all over the world. I've been in Bolivia, I've been to Cambodia, I've been all over the world. And never has my card just not worked, because they're like, oh, and because it's like a Visa card. They're like, oh, we don't accept this type of Visa. And I was like, what do you mean you don't accept this type of Visa? And so, you start to realize that there are all of these nuances in terms of, one, financial access, 2, people's like a penetration and like openness to financial platforms. And then 3, you feel like, okay, what is the real problem people are facing? Like in Latin America, these days there's a lot of fintechs taking off, but coming from Colombia, where when I lived there were almost no, when I first got to Colombia, there were no like fintech apps. People barely had debit cards you could use online. People definitely didn't have credit cards. So, people fundamentally weren't really into e-commerce, right? So how do you go to market in a market where people don't really trust trust putting their money on the internet, right? Because they've had limited exposure, right? So now you're having to really educate people and have them, give them all the other alternatives. Like, a good example is about Uber, right? So in Uber, at least when I was at Uber, I don't know about today at Uber, but when you order Uber in the US, you can't order an Uber and pay for an Uber in cash. But in Latin America, again, where people don't have, debit cards in some places that can be used online, or people, don't have credit cards, cash has to be the way that you go to market. Cash has to be the way that you give people access to your tech platform. Then you come over, like I said, to like a Nigeria or African context. And you got Nigeria and you got Kenya, two very different places. I don't even see any cash when I'm in Kenya. Everything just kind of works so well with M-Pesa, right? And everyone has the ability to send money no matter where you are, no matter who you are, no matter what kind of phone you have. Getting money and moving money is domestically something that everyone can do. So how do you go to market and convince people that they should use crypto or want to use crypto when their payment systems work pretty seamlessly? Okay, well, now the use case and the way that you tell that story is about cross-border payments, right? And how people in Kenya maybe want to get they're freelancers, they want to get paid from the US, or they're looking for remittances from the US and vice versa. Or they're sending money to Tanzania, or what have you. Like, this is actually now where you start to think about your go-to-market strategy and that storytelling about, okay, well, you can't just say, oh, hey, crypto, your system is broken, because the system works, right? So how do you tell that story so that it makes sense, right, to problems that they are solving for? And then you pop over to Nigeria, where I'm not going to just comment on what doesn't work there and what does, but this is why you see so much crypto adoption in West Africa, in Nigeria, not just because of currency devaluation, hedging against that, but because sending money domestically, externally, can be a real challenge. And so people are really looking to adopt very quickly, whether they're doing cross-border payments because they're, a small business, whether they're looking to get remittances from the US or from the UK. Like, the Nigerian use case for crypto is huge. Now, come over to Southeast Asia, and again, you say, oh, maybe Singapore and Philippines are the same. No, they're very different markets, right? If you look at if I take my Coinbase experience and I look at what customers, would invest in Singapore versus what they invest in Australia versus what they're investing in the Philippines, they're very different things, right? Australia, people are more the risk tolerance is much higher, and people really are very much blue chip crypto assets. So then that's how you go to market there. You think about, okay, well, what do people care about? How do people engage with crypto? What value does it bring them? And then in Singaporeans are very pragmatic. They don't have a high risk tolerance. So for them, having stablecoins that can earn yield is something that's important. So it's a long-winded answer, but my point is to say, when you think about go-to-market, there's no blanket solution. You have to deeply understand the audience you're serving. You have to understand the problems that they face. You have to understand why the problems they face are unique and why they're actually happening in their ecosystem. And then you have to figure out the right messaging, and you have to make sure you're coming in with the right solution. Right. And so I think that's my long-winded answer to go to market.
Wow. That's a very, very detailed answer. And I think it's really great for anyone who may be listening and is maybe figuring out, okay, we're trying to break into this market. What are the steps? And I think you've really clarified that, which is awesome. And now moving into what you're building now, BlockRadar. I love how you frame it, redesigning how money moves. For listeners who might be new to it, what exactly is BlockRadar and what problem are you solving? If I'm a startup founder, a Web3 project, or a payments company, how does BlockRadar actually help me move money smarter or faster?
Yeah, that's a great question. So at BlockRadar, we provide a stablecoin wallet infrastructure. And so if you're not Web3 native or you're not crypto native, you're like, what is she talking about? And so, you have to understand that when you want to have any stablecoin powered experience, right? So if you're a payments company or you're a Web3 company, there must be wallets like in the
Yeah.
mix, right? Whether they're custodial or non-custodial, because where do you hold the value of those stable coins, right? And so the value has to be stored and collected and withdrawn from wallets, and right. And so this is essentially what we offer. And so there are three very simple use cases in which customers can leverage our wallet infrastructure. It's that one, you want to do stablecoin collections. So that means, you are a business that, again, we have like some companies that are not crypto focused at all, but they want to allow their customers to, on ramp or, top up their wallet into their ecosystem with stablecoin. And then they do the conversion into Naira or to the local fiat. And then, you can also do collection with respect, or sorry, you can also do deposits. Sorry, withdrawals, right? And so with the withdrawals, it's the same is true too, right? So if you think about like a payroll company, like a deal, right? Let's say that, people in Kenya are wanting to, they've, have their wages in USD that they've earned from the deal platform, but, they don't want to necessarily withdraw in Kenya shillings at the moment. They want to have dollar for dollar, the equivalent. So now they want to withdraw into USDC or USDT, right? And so now the wallet infrastructure can allow you to do that. And then the third use case is really around treasury management. So it's really, how do you move money through your ecosystem? So if you are collecting or if you are withdrawing, how does that money move? How do you think about that on the asset level, on the chain level, and making sure that you can have a proper cash management of the stable coins you receive? And then also treasury management can look like a use case where you have a neobank that wants to offer USD denominated bank accounts, but they don't want to tell their customers that. Like, so they still collect Kenya shillings, Naira, what have you, and they then give their customer the that new functionality and features to have that USD bank account, all backed by stablecoin, right? And so that's also how you can do that treasury management use case. So those are the ways that, if you're a fintech, right, and you want to receive and withdraw or, do treasury management of stable coins, this is how you can use BlockRadar. And the last thing I'll say, because I think you asked what problem you're solving, is that, like, at the core level, we're enabling stablecoin rails. That's the problem we're solving. But what problem is really that solving? Well, if you think about cross-border businesses, or you think about fintechs generally in emerging markets, their customers are using use cases like B2B cross-border payments. They're doing things like remittances, right? They're doing things like, payroll and settlement. And they're also doing things like, I don't know, again, offering different USD exposure, right? Whether it's through a brokerage account or through bank accounts. And so all of these things can be done more efficiently through stablecoins, right? And I'm not just talking about USD denominated stablecoins, but also local stablecoins can also facilitate and make these payment flows more effective and more efficient and cheaper. And so I encourage any and every fintech who's operating in emerging markets, whether they're a large, a fintech like Flutterwave, to someone that's just getting started out, to really explore what stablecoin payment rails can do for your business. And, then you can come to us and we're happy to talk to you, or, you can figure out other ways. But I think I recommend every fintech to figure out how to get ahead and get those stablecoin rails powered.
Awesome. And BlockRadar has already processed about 40 million plus US dollars. Don't know if that figure is correct at this moment.
It's not. It's correct anymore. We are at 92 million.
Oh my God, that's a very impressive number, and a big up to you guys, which actually shows how the product you're building is really like useful and is getting adoption. And my question is, where are you seeing the most traction? I know I read that teams like as a graph are already using and building on BlockRadar, and within the teams that are actually building on BlockRadar right now, which industries or use cases you've touched?
At the center of kind of like this whole stablecoin like craze and and movement, because you see so many interesting use cases, right? So you think about Aza. Aza's a really great one, right? But Aza's a crypto kind of first sort of experience, right? So if you think about them, they're a WhatsApp AI agent that allows people to basically move in and out of stablecoins to local fiat, such as Naira. And, it's so easy, right? So like my entire team, when they receive USDC, they just use Aza. They just use Aza to get in and out of fiat because it's so easy. It's cheap and they love it. So this is what my team uses, but they're also crypto native, right? And then, you have other use cases that are like, I don't want to say not sexy, but you have other use cases that are like not so cool and cutting edge, but are really actually important, right? When you think about, B2B flows, right? So I think some interesting use cases that have popped up is that you have a lot of businesses in Nigeria and Kenya who are working with vendors in China and in India, across Asia, who need access to, stablecoin rails to be able to send these funds like more efficiently, right? So like, again, while it's not a sexy use case, you realize it's a really big use case and so much volume is going through these corridors that people would be surprised about how important the two markets corridors can be for these use cases. So I'd say that's, and we see everything in between, right? But you have one that's pretty like not necessarily crypto first, right? Like, you have these, intermediaries who are doing the on-off ramping. So their customers still just feel fiat on both sides. And, they're enabling those, those trade flows. And then again, you have the very crypto forward, right? Whereby people are, retail customers can use it.
Okay, cool. That's really interesting. And huge congratulations, by the way, for winning the Crypto Valley Conference startup pitch. I just remember waking up and I was like seeing it all over LinkedIn. I was like, wow, this is really, really, really cool. And congratulations on that. And what was the experience like? And have you seen any changes in terms of investor interest? I believe that should be the top of the list. And also even on team momentum or partnerships that are coming up. How is it like?
Yeah. So we just won last week, and I was just telling Phyllis at the beginning of this call, like I am still not even settled in. So I'm just moving all over the world at the moment. But so going to Crypto Valley was a really good conference. So, I must say, with my Coinbase days, I've been spoiled. So I've been able to go to different conferences all over the world. And, never pitch, but just be able to have the exposure to go to these different conferences. But going to Crypto Valley was great because it was my first time in Switzerland. The second time I went to a conference in Europe. And, it wasn't like a really large conference. It was like a decent size, roughly 2,000 people. And everything was really well done, like really well executed, very organized, like just very well done, really quality pitches that were on the stage with us, really good investors on the judgment panel, right? You had everything from the Solana Foundation to the C Labs. So you had it was just a very good and well done experience. And so like hats off to the Crypto Valley organization for really putting on a really good event. And so, for us to have won, I can feel really proud because it wasn't like one of these things where you're like, oh, like, it's not so well done, or the quality the projects weren't so good quality. It was all of those things. So like I was actually like a bit nervous of if we would win or not. And I remember telling my team before going, I was like, guys, this we have to win. So what can we do to make sure our pitch is ready to go? Because I was like, this is not going to be a situation where we're the only crypto company talking and people are just going to get it. Like, we need to stand out from the pack of these all crypto organizations and show them why we are building the best product, on stage. And so again, overall, it was a great experience. In terms of what's happened now, it's been a whirlwind. Like I've barely had time to catch up on all of my things, but certainly we've had strong investor interest. Investors, some investors we hadn't heard from in a few days or a week. Hey Morgan, how's it going? Congratulations, and so it was just kind of good to kind of get that validation and re-engage some investors who we had already been talking to before. And then I think on the customer side, it's been just so much momentum, right? Like we had so many customers come to us and say, hey, I just saw you guys on LinkedIn, or hey, I saw you guys on X. Like, we really want to figure out how we can fit your wallets into our tech stack. And so that's been great. And so the comments that Abdul and I have given the team is that this, like, we can't just get, like, this can't be like ooh, we won, let's relax now.
Yeah.
This is like, ooh, we won, we are going to be in the trenches, right? Because as I said, like, there's a new influx of customers. We all need to be ready. There are new features we want to ship that these customers want, and so like everyone needs to have their head in the game, and this is good validation to give everyone the momentum that they need to like show up and make sure that we're building products that our customers want. And so everyone is really excited, but we want to make sure everyone is like ready to go, locked in and ready to go.
Awesome. That's really cool. And I'm also, I know we recently wanted to integrate BlockRadar. I believe like it's something that's being picked up, which is, I think we will be one of your customers, and I'm really excited for that.
Yes.
Yeah, you're building something really cool and exciting at the same time. So I wanted us to move from now, just moving back a bit from your journey being an operator in large organizations and now a co-founder. What has been the biggest mindset shift for you during this transition, and what are the things you're learning, or in the previous companies you worked with, such as Coinbase? Like, I know Coinbase is deep into crypto. What are some of the lessons you learned there that you are now using and directly influencing how you build BlockRadar?
Yeah, so I think Brian Armstrong, my previous CEO, I think he just said like some quote about like how so many of the hottest crypto projects that have been bought, like Bridge, have been ex-Coinbase people. And I think he may have said, no, I don't want to misquote it, but I think he said it's a founder factory. And I agree with that. I think like, at Coinbase, there are certain values and team structure and like hardworking, sort of nature that you have to be to like succeed at Coinbase. And so you start to learn how to because if you look at a Coinbase org structure, almost everybody has to contribute. Even if you're a manager managing a large team, you're still an individual contributor responsible for executing something yourself. Everyone is having to write documents of their plans and their what they'll be working on, what they're executing, what they want to work on. Like, so there's not people even at the highest level are still executors, right? And so I think like that's one thing that Coinbase has from your from a work experience that you don't really get in a lot of big techs. And big tech, you go, and especially when you navigate your way up, and some people just go in there and relax, when you're in more of a leadership role, but that's not Coinbase. Just not. So I do think that it was a really good training ground to be able to execute like flawlessly, be customer obsessed, and then like being willing to work really hard. Like I worked quite late when I was working at Coinbase. And, a lot of it had to do with the fact that I'm an APAC and I'm having to serve several people across the world. But I got used to the long nights. And so now you think about founder mode, like I can't even imagine if like I was working a 9 to 5 and then had to come into founder mode. Oh my God, like it wouldn't have made any sense. I mean, some days I'm going to bed at 4 a.m. Right. And so it's like, okay, so you it's an easier transition, I'd say, when you're executing, when you're putting in a lot of effort to ship and deliver results. I think what's different and what's nice to be a founder now is that all of that hard work, I can see the direct impact of the work and my efforts, right? Whether it's what we're shipping to our customers as we watch our customers grow, or even like, winning different competitions, right? All of that hard work is paying off. And so I'd say that, I'm trying to think like what has been the hardest transition part of it. And I think like the hardest transition part of it is that I've never worked in sales, right? So I shouldn't say I never. Like I haven't worked in sales from a professional capacity. I worked in sales when I was a kid and, worked at different, companies when I was a young person. But when becoming a salesperson when that's not your initial nature is can be a challenge. And so really learning, what people want, how what you're building fits into their solution, and kind of learning the art, right, of being able to hear them, understand their problem, and then being able to articulate why our service, fix that problem is not an easy job. Like I know for a while, I was still trying to figure out and learn how to become a salesperson. So I think that is one of the things, that I had to learn, because I've done marketing, I've done ops, I've done finance, I've done all the other things. You name it, I've done it, except for sales. So this is what's, and as a co-founder and COO, like that's a big part of my job is to do sales. And so I think that was one of the transition. And then the second piece that I'd say has been hard is that because you're doing sales, you don't really own your schedule. So like you can be having a sales call with customers at 2 a.m. Like if that's the customer, that's what they need. Like you go do it right now. So this, this is kind of, again, this is like very early days, early stages, right? So this is kind of what you have to do to get to that 90 million plus volume, right? To make sure you're flexible and not, giving up hold of your schedule. And so yeah.
Nice. I was actually, I thought fundraising would be like at the top of the list of some of the most challenging things. But yeah, I guess sales, fundraising is also a bit of sales because you have to sell your product and all that. But how has the fundraising process been like for BlockRadar?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So, yeah, I guess Abdul and I've not done, Abdul's a second time co-founder, but he was CTO at the last company he was a co-founder at. And so he didn't necessarily get involved in fundraising. And, this is my first time at a startup. And so, or I should say this part of a startup, because I have been involved when, I've watched a startup get acquired. So a much later stage. And, fundraising is definitely, it's not for the faint of heart. You have to be ready to, again, take calls and meet investors at any time, right? Because, like I remember I had one investor, they're in San Francisco, I'm in Singapore, right? Yeah. And I said, hey, do you mind if we have a 8 a.m. call in San Francisco? Because it's, the time you propose, which is 9 a.m., is midnight for me. And they're like, oh, no, sorry. 9 a.m. is the earliest we can meet. Okay. Great. No worries. I will take the midnight call. And so these sort of things, you have to understand how you have to be really flexible. I think the other thing too is, as an American, I sit in this weird spot, right? So I have my experience of my friends who are co-founders, ex Coinbase or ex Uber, just generally people who are my peers who are American or in Asia, right? And I watch how they fundraise, I watch how their valuations, and I see the timelines, and everything just moves at one pace,
Yeah.
and just like Crypto Valley can have a conference and have a commitment of 1.2 in soft commitments, that can happen in the West, right? They're confident they'll get enough good pitches. They've got enough bullish VCs, right, to want to be able to make that commitment. And so they'll do it. Now, I have an African co-founder, a Nigerian co-founder, right? And so his cohort of friends and other founder friends have very different experiences in terms of valuation, timeline, the investor exposure that they're getting. And so, for us serving Africa and developing markets, or say emerging markets, we fit somewhere in between, right? So we we are getting a lot of the commentary and the local desire from regional and African VCs, but also we're getting the same momentum and commentary from Western VCs. And so I'll just say that our experience is very different with the two types of investors. And so I think we are fortunate that we do get exposure to Western VCs, because again, these guys are able to make decisions really fast. They're able to be able to commit really fast. They're able to go through their process really fast, right? Whereas some of these smaller funds or just local, like again African funds, they still need funding from the West. Right. So they're going through a process, right, to get funding from the West. And so then it takes longer. So it's just been a really interesting process, to say the least. But, Abdul and I are, we love to learn. I think collectively both love learning. And so this has been a really great learning experience. I share what I hear from my friends. He shares what he hears with his friends. And that helps us manage our expectations. So we're looking forward to closing this round soon. We've got some really good investors lined up, for us. And so we're excited to get back to building and just get our heads down and shipping.
Awesome. And a lot of good luck on that. But I know you guys are winning it. So, yeah. And so before we wrap up, what are you guys building at BlockRadar right now, which the public might not know of, but you're super, super excited about? And how can our listeners support what you're doing? So other operators or other investors listening in, how can they support what you're doing?
Okay, so two parts, I guess, to that question. I think question one is that we want to be a full stack provider for fintechs and everything they need when they want to have stablecoin rails. And so if you think about what it means to have a full stack, payments sort of provider. Oh, my internet. Okay. When you think about the full stack payments provider, you think about card issuing, you think about yield, you think about all of these different things that you would get, with a full stack, fiat payment space. You think about it like a bank almost, right? And all of the different attributes that a bank can offer a customer. So we are thinking about our tech stack in the same way. We will be able to have in one unified API everything you need, from rails to yield to liquidity, in one single unified API. And so we're really excited to offer that to our customers. And again, if you're looking to power these rails in, again, our priority markets are emerging markets, but we serve customers outside of emerging markets as well. So if you're fintech and you're looking to get started, or you want to just even understand how to get started, let's have a conversation. I think in terms of people, investors, or like listeners who might not have fintech organization, or just, curious about how you can support us or help us out. Look, if there are interesting topics that you want us to look into, talk about, like one of the things I think is important to us is making sure that, we're writing like meaningful blog posts. As we first kind of got started, we were thinking about what are what do people need to know about stablecoins in emerging markets or for fintechs? What do people need to know about privacy when it comes to stablecoin adoption for large corporations? What do people need to know about of why they shouldn't build these wallets themselves, right? And
Yeah.
what they need to consider if they do want to go build it. So if there's content or information that you want us to look into or to share or to write about, let us know. We are happy to do that and write pieces on that, because I do think across the team, there's four of us now. We have a wealth of experience, right, across different markets and across different, payments and fintech verticals. So we would love to write any articles. So if you think that there's something interesting we should be looking into or should be talking about, let us know, and we'll definitely do that.
Amazing. I think I'll be the first one to meet him.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, but that's a conversation for later. I just wanna say an amazing thank you for creating time, for sharing your journey, for sharing about BlockRadar, and you've mentioned that people should like follow up. So where can they follow you, and where can they learn more about BlockRadar?
Yeah, they can just follow us at BlockRadar HQ on X, formerly known as Twitter. We try to put a lot of content out there. And so you can also just DM us there. Outside of that, you can follow us on LinkedIn. You can follow me on LinkedIn. You can follow me on Twitter. I'm more MORE_again on Twitter. You can reach out there. Abdul is I am not static. He's much more active on socials than I am. So you can reach out to us in any of those channels. We're happy to talk to you. And again, if you just want to learn, one of the things that I think it's true about Abdul and I, we love to teach and we love to help people understand certain things. So if you're curious or questions or topics, just reach out.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I'm sad this episode is ending. I had more questions, but I know you're tired. So we'll end it at this point. And to the listeners, if you enjoyed today's episode, go check out BlockRadar and follow Morgan on socials. And also share this episode with someone building or investing in fintech. And don't forget to subscribe. We've got more amazing episodes coming up with builders and operators shaping the future of money. Till next time, bye.
Thank you. Bye.